Transphobia in Sports: The Deeper Issue, created and narrated by Ilya Parker. I want to start by saying that there have been and are several ways that trans and gender nonconforming people are erased from society. So if you think about the ways that we are murdered by people that we know, hate crimes extended upon us, the way that state sanctioned violence is enacted upon us, the way that we experience institutional, structural violence. And it's no different when we talk about some of the anti-trans legislation. Anti-trans bills have a centuries-long history. Some of the first legal policing of trans people in the United States began in the 1840s until the 1930s in the form of what is now known as cross-dressing legislations. The explicit goal of these laws was to disappear trans and gender nonconforming people from the public so that the government could naturalize the myth that there are only men and only women who exist. If you didn't see people who are visibly gender nonconforming daily, then you could think we didn't exist at all. So it's important to be aware of the impact of what we know as bathroom legislation, which led to the policing of trans healthcare and policing of trans sports, not only as specific issues, but as cultural framework in the United States of attempted erasure and attempted genocide of trans and gender nonconforming people. Here is an image of two people of color, beautifully dressed, femme-presenting folks being escorted out of a ball in the 1960s. These folks were arrested and subsequently jailed on charges of masquerading and indecent exposure. Politics of backlash, the last 6 years until now. Gender nonconforming and trans people are part of some of the most targeted in our communities because we visibly represent a disruption to the gender binary, and we are often disappeared because of this. Therefore, the anti-trans laws and policies happening from 2016 until now at the state level is directly related to the political backlash resulting from the huge marriage equality win in June of 2015. This federal win focused primarily on cis-gay progression. The bills initially rolled out at the state level targeted trans and gender nonconforming people regarding restroom and locker room use or public accommodations. However, many of these state bills were shut down by the amazing efforts of local organizing. Although we had a huge Supreme Court win in 2020 regarding Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, there has been another upsurge of state-level anti-trans legislation with a hyper-focus on sports and trans healthcare rights. During 2020, state legislators in 20 different states introduced bills to ban transgender high school students from participating in sports. On his first day in office, President Biden issued an executive order on the federal government to fully implement the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. President Biden explicitly stated that, quote, children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom, locker room, or school sports. End quote. Ignoring federal law and the Constitution, multiple states rushed to beat the clock and implement transgender sports bans of their own, with 11 state legislators advancing bills banning transgender sports participation in accordance with the gender identity in the first month of 2021. Let's be clear. Legislators supporting these bills are actively defying medical experts, sports associations like the NCAA and the International Olympic Committee, and school administrators all over the country, all of whom say that the policy proposed by these bills are harmful and unnecessary. Meanwhile, Alabama, Missouri, Texas, Mississippi, Montana, Indiana, New Hampshire, and Utah so far have also introduced bills that would criminalize or otherwise ban gender-affirming care for transgender youth. Several of these bills classify any gender affirmation of trans young people as a form of, quote, child abuse, end quote, a provision which, if enacted, threatens to imprison medical providers as well as parents and guardians who affirm their children. This current legislation is particularly harmful because it reinforces the naturalization framework in order to invalidate the identities of transgender people in two ways. One, by explicitly stating that sex is biological, and two, by explicitly stating that gender is a choice. This is also a way to politicize and make trans people a threat when the real threat is gender norms. Organizers state by state are literally trying to prevent courts and laws from solidifying and cementing transphobia as fact. While it's important to fight against this legislation and defend trans rights, it's also about rooting out the inaccurate and harmful beliefs underlying these policies. Check out equalityfederation.org to find out if there's any anti-trans legislation in your state and ways that you can plug in and do this work. Debunking 4 Myths That Fuel Anti-Trans Legislation by ACLU, North Dakota. Fact: including trans athletes will benefit everyone. Excluding women who are trans hurts all women. It invites gender policing that could subject any woman to invasive tests or accusations of being too masculine or too good at their sport to be a quote-unquote real woman. I want folks to be mindful, if you aren't already, of the case regarding the Olympic runner Caster Semenya, who is currently experiencing this right now. Further, this myth reinforces stereotypes that those who identify as women are weak and in need of protection. Politicians have used the protection trope time and time again, including in 2016 when they tried banning trans people from public restrooms by creating the debunked bathroom predator myth. The real motive is never about protection. It's about excluding trans people from yet another public space. The arena of sports is no different. Fact: trans athletes do not have an unfair advantage in sports. Trans athletes vary in athletic ability just like cisgender athletes. There is no one single determinant of success in sports. Women and girls who are trans face discrimination and violence that makes it difficult to remain in school. According to the U.S. Trans Survey, 22% of trans women who were perceived as trans in school were harassed so badly they had to leave school because of it. Another 10% were kicked out of school. The idea that women and girls have an advantage because they are trans ignores the actual conditions of their lives. Fact: trans girls are girls. Girls who are trans are told repeatedly that they are not real girls, and boys who are trans are told that they are not real boys. Non-binary people are told that their gender is not real and that they must be either boys or girls. None of these statements are true. Trans people are exactly who we say we are. There is no one way for women's bodies to be. Women, including women who are transgender, intersex, or disabled, have a range of different physical characteristics. Many people who are not trans can have hormone levels outside of the range considered typical of a cis person of their assigned sex. When a person does not identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth, they must be able to transition socially, and that includes participating in sports consistent with their gender identity. Trans people belong on the same teams as other students. Trans people have the same right to play sports as anybody else, and acutely excluding trans people from any space or activity is harmful, particularly for trans youth. Believing and perpetuating myths and misconceptions about trans athletes is harmful. Denying trans people the right to participate is discrimination, and it doesn't just hurt trans people, it hurts all of us. Tell your local lawmakers to stop attacking your community and vote against anti-trans legislation. Thanks so much for watching and listening. You can learn more about my work at decolonizingfitness.com. If you learned from this presentation, please feel free to send me a donation. My Venmo and Cash App is located on this screen. Thank you so much.